Hi, this is Tom for PokerVIP.com and welcome to part one where I will be reviewing John's play on BetSafe. So John's doing a second bankroll challenge on BetSafe. This video is a standalone video, but it's also a continuation of the Betfair series that I did previously as the four-parter. So in these videos, John's gone through what I reviewed, watched them himself, and hopefully adapted them to his play. So if you haven't seen the original four-part series in Betfair, I urge you to go and do that because there is going to be a significant amount of progression in his play from that series to this series, and there's also going to be some spots where if I feel that we went over them in a lot of detail in previous series, then I'm going to be sort of skimming over them a bit just for the sake of the length of the video. So that being said, let's jump in. So the first hand we're going to touch on is on the left-hand table, the double-suited, double-paired hand. Not much to be said about this other than the fact that we like the fact that John is defending this. He's going to be defending this multi-way. We want him defending around 40% range when he's defending multi-way versus something closer to 50% heads up. And this is going to be in the 40% range. So yeah, perfectly happy with how he played this, and then it's a pretty standard check fold when he misses the flop. So we're happy with how he's played this. It seems to be pretty straightforward, but good fundamentals are encouraging to see. And we're also a fan of the fact he's folding sort of stuff from the small blind when we're facing raises from early position. Marginal hands such as this, which previously he was a bit prone to overcalling, so we're happy to see him folding that kind of stuff. So we've got the Queen Jack 9-7 double suited, and there's going to be an interesting spot on the left-hand table. So if I remember correctly, it's going to get folded around to, I think, the button. As Millie burns my camera side. Yeah, so it's going to get folded around to the button, and John's going to put the 3-bet in. And we're just going to pause here. So we quite like the 3-bet. If we're on a really loose table where we think there's going to be a huge number of overcalls from the small blind, then perhaps we would put this in a call range. But in general, this is going to be a pretty good 3-bet, just for the post-flop potential it has. And squeezing out the small blind, taking this hand heads up versus multi-way is definitely going to be a profitable decision. Button is also going to be pretty wide, so we're going to be doing pretty well versus that range. And we prefer 3-betting this versus something like Bear Queens, just for the number of flops this is going to connect with. So again, much as we have in the previous series, we plug this into Odds Oracle, and if we plug it in, we're going to see that we're going to be doing pretty well here. So if we just put it in, and the main thing we're going to see is that we are going to be doing all right in hot and cold equity terms, but the main thing is just the beautiful flop equity distribution that we have with this hand, where we just we can just continue on such a high proportion of boards. It's close to 75% of the time that we're going to have the 33% required to continue. So we're just going to flop so well with this hand that we're a big fan of it. I mean, if we're being nitpicky, we'd prefer that the clubs were jack high rather than 9 high, but that's being particularly pedantic. Something weird happens in the Tapist is overcalled, which is something that you're going to see at the micros a bit more than you would higher up. I think in general, and there's a hand later in the piece that we're going to touch on this as well, overcalling 3-bets, especially when you're not closing the action, is fraught with danger. You cap your range, you're playing versus uncapped ranges, and you don't close action, so there's a very low chance you won't even get to see the flop for the price that you are immediately being charged. So this is a play that I wouldn't advocate ever doing. I think it's a huge losing play. As we've touched on in the previous series, calling 3-bets is always going to be a losing play. It's just a question of, are we losing less than we've previously invested? And when you haven't invested anything and you're just cold calling, then that point becomes kind of mute. As then John is going to get a pretty bad flop. He thinks about betting, and I think he was going to be betting. That is the sort of sizing we go for. But betting it's 2 people on a dry board where one or both of them have connected with aces is just going to be, kind of setting on money on fire, to be honest. I really don't see a way that that's going to work. But there it is. It's just a bit of a weird spot, really a bit awkward, but we like how we played it post-flop. Like how I played it pre-flop. Sometimes you don't get the result that your play necessarily deserves. And, ironically, the player that played it the worst, pre-flop has managed to connect, but that is the way of things at times. And yeah, we're happy that he's mixing some of that stuff in. If he's facing like an under the gun range that's raised, then that three bet wouldn't become a three bet, just because we're three betting such a tighter range. But against a 50% button range, or something of that ilk, we don't have HUD stats on the guy, but that's what we'd assume he'd be raising on the button. It's going to be pretty damn good. So we're happy to see that. What we're slightly less happy to see is the hand on the left-hand table. So if we just pause it here, John is in an interesting spot in that it's got limped from under the gun, and then we have a post. So this guy's got a completely randomized range, and this guy we can assume is somewhat weak, just based on the limp rather than the raise. That being said, our hand's fairly weak, to be honest with you. It's not gonna flop particularly well, and if we talk about the three tenets that we require pre-flop, we have the suitedness, but it's single suitedness. We don't really have the connectivity. When we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about much higher connectivity than this, and we don't have the high card status either. So it's kind of like a 1 in 3, hand, and that's not the kind of thing we want to be raising. Plus, we have the issue that this hand is going to benefit from being heads up by virtue of the dead money already involved. It's very likely to go multi-way, and it's unlikely that opponents are going to be limp folding, especially at this limit. So yeah, we just be ideally looking for a fold here and just finding a better spot. But as we run the tape, John goes for the isolation. So I'm not. I can understand his logic from here in that being aggressive and isolating is generally a good idea, but he's just going to require a stronger hand and a stronger range to do this. So if we just pause this here, again, plugged into Odds Oracle, how the hand would be doing against a 15% range. And the reason we put a 15% range is we considered that, in an ordinary cutoff spot, we'd want something around the 25% range. But given that the fact this hand is going to go multi-way rather than heads up, we're going to cut out the parts of range that benefit from being heads up versus the stuff that benefits from going multi-way, just because the likelihood of this going heads up is not that significant. And when we're isolating, we need a tighter range than we would for an open raising range, which is why I've cut it down to 15%. As we see, just in pure hot and cold, against that 15% range, this is doing terribly. It has okay flop equity distribution, but in all probability, it's going to be flopping, quite poorly in terms of the strength of hand that it can make. So if we plug it in, I'm going to run the interactive hand stats on it just to illustrate, what kind of hands this hand would typically make. As we see, we're going to make a lot of, we're going to miss quite a bit, but just by the very nature of the hand, we're going to make a lot of bottom pairs. We're going to make, if we make two pairs, then we're certainly going to be bottom two. If we make straights, it's going to be the bottom end of straights. The only thing that we're really super confident on is going to be the flush, really. Even like ace five is unlikely to be the top two, and the times it is, there's a straight possible as well. So it's a hand that looks far better than it actually is. Just to touch on the right-hand table while this hand's going on, we just like the fold that John made pre-flop. He resisted it. This hand would be a button open and nothing else. Ignoring results completely here. This would not be in a cutoff range, and certainly not calling an open. So these again are the hands he was playing previously that we like. The fact that he's cutting those out of his range. So we get to a interesting flop on the left-hand table into two people, and although we don't really represent much of a range, we actually have flopped pretty damn well with the two pair. It's unlikely that micro-stakes people are going to take a massive advantage, notice of like range advantage and really start raising. Just because it's difficult for us to have it. I mean, we could theoretically still have three jacks here reasonably often. If we're betting into two people, and betting into two people just makes it that much stronger. So I'm going to kind of discount the fact that we can get sort of bluff raised by range, by having a range disadvantage here, and we quite like the bet. I don't expect to get played back out here. I don't expect opponents to be balanced. So Yeah, we're absolutely fine. When it goes call call, we're somewhat disappointed, and when that is the turn, we are just going to be giving up. There's a very high probability that one of our opponents has Jack X here, and we have very limited redraws, if they're live at all. And yeah, so he's going to make a good fold on the left-hand table, but I think we should have just avoided the spot entirely. Right-hand table, John's going to make a disciplined fold with the ace, queen, 6, 8, a bit too disconnected, and the fact it's rainbow means it's not going to be a defend. Single suited it would be if it's suited to the queen or higher, but we like that fold. So yeah, again, good to see that he's cutting some of the weaker stuff out of range, not being quite as stationary as he was in the first 4 parts of the Betfair series. That being said, we would have opened on the right-hand table. We think that's a pretty good button open. It's really only the very weakest sort of ace X combos. Something like ace 6 4 3 suited to the 6, that kind of stuff. Right-hand table. We're just going to pause it here. Double suited. Pretty reasonable defend, especially in a 3-handed game. 3-betting is just going to be a bit too wide, but yeah, it's going to flop okay. It's difficult to make nut hands, but in a heads-up spot, that's slightly less critical. And we're going to run the tape, and John is going to be checked into. In which case, we are going to like his approach of betting the equity of the straight draw. He's going to bet pick up a good chunk of the time. Unfortunately for him, this is not one of those times. But we like the idea, we like the aggressive play he's shown. And the turn is pretty close. Now, he's going to check here, inertia. And although we haven't improved, it's kind of difficult to think about like what would our opponent's check call range be on flop. So he's going to have some 7-6, although we do block that to an extent. He's going to have some 8x and he's going to have some flush draws. Flush draws without the straight draw. If he had like a combo draw, he's never ever check calling. So it's a bare flush draw, it's an 8, or it's an open ender, and there's going to be 1 or 2 like jacks and queens type things in there as well that are just calling 1, hoping you shut down. So none of that's really improved here, really. The only hand that's really improved is 7-6 with a 10 randomly. Maybe a flush that's hit a 10 as well is possible. We have a good chunk of 10-8 in our range. If we're repping, once upon a time I flop 2 pair, once upon a time I flop a set, then frankly a card that does not complete straight, does not complete flush is going to be good for us. So although it's not a default, I would be absolutely fine with him betting turn here. If he's checking, he's basically checking to only bet times he improves, and I think 2 streeting here is reasonable. It's going to be a bit player dependent, but it's an option he could have taken. If he's doing that, like 40-50% of the time, and this just happens to be the 50% of the time that he checks back, then we're totally cool with that as well. It's difficult to tell, with just like a single shot, rather than analyzing a full sort of database on that kind of stuff. As it is, our opponent does show up with the 7-6 with the 10, which is fortunate. But again, saying that the check there would be perfect is kind of being very, very results orientated. So. Again, we like the fact that John is folding kind of disconnected stuff when out of position and not closing action. That's 2 hold'em hands stitched together, so we quite like the fold. So yes, right-hand table, we're going to have an interesting spot. John opens, and he's going to get 3-bet. And he's actually going to fold. Now, we're going to touch on this. I like the fact that he's folding to some 3-bets. You see a lot of people at these limits, and higher for that matter, who call 100% of 3-bets. And if we consider the ranges that we're opening, especially the button range, then it's really going to be, massively detrimental. If, for example, if we're playing somebody who's 3-betting like a low number, let's say 3% of range, and we have a hand like ace, king, jack, deuce, single suited, if you ran that equity of how that's doing versus the 3% range, you see it would be doing terribly because, we're dominated by the aces and, we're effectively playing a 3-card hand. So there's going to be instances like that where folding 3-bets is correct. And 4-bets, it further accentuates that. And we're going to touch on that in a later hand where John does get 4-bet, and we're going to talk about why that 4-bet happened to be profitable to call, or not profitable, less losing than the fold. But in this individual instance, we would actually be considering a call, especially considering this is a 3-handed game. So the first thing I did is plug in a 15% range, and you see hot and cold. Hot and cold's fine. Flop equity distribution is about 60%, so it's okay. It's not stunning, but it's reasonable. We plugged in a 20% range to kind of see how that was going to be doing, and as we see, it doesn't actually change the hot and cold much. You know, it's pretty much of a muchness. So the point is, like, versus either of those kind of ranges, and I really don't anticipate the opponent to be through betting tighter than that in a three-handed game. But we're actually doing okay. It's not stellar, and I don't hate the fold. The fold is reasonable, but I think this is a spot we could have called. It's only really if we plug in kind of, you know, put it like a deuce in, rather than you know, rather than the 9. So it's a less connected hand that we see that we flop, you know, slightly poorer, and that would be kind of like the borderline of what I'd be folding. But I think in this instance where we kind of connect it, you know, a bit more connected, have a bit more post-flop potential, I'd be calling this, but we don't hate the fold. Yeah, it's kind of borderline and, you know, shades of grey. So we like the fact that he's thinking about, you know, making disciplined folds at the time. You know, the previous videos we've played far too loose. You know, if he's making 1 or 2 folds that are a bit tight here, that's absolutely fine. We can just take it in a bit and you know, find the optimum middle ground. You know, I'd far rather he played a bit tight than played far too loose as he was previously. So we got the hand on the right side table again. The double suited jack. We like the call. Again, heads up. We have position. Granted, it's going to be like 2 hands stitched together a bit, but in position, you know, in a small blind, big blind relationship, it's going to be doing fine. Again, you know, how much value do we have with the 6 high flush? I mean, that kind of, you know, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So he calls on flop. The call is fine. We could consider raising against particularly aggressive players that we think are going to overplay King X, players that might want to overplay, you know, potentially overplay hands like aces. The important thing is we don't want to get re-raised and sort of blow ourselves off the equity of the hand. So the call is fine. And you know, raising on that kind of dry board is very, very polarized. So you know, the call is absolutely fine. We'd mix the occasional raise in for the sake of balance, but the call is a-okay. So if I remember correctly, Inertia is now going to check after tanking for a while, and John has a decision. We're going to pause it here. John is going to fire approximately half pot, or a tad over it. So if he's going to bet, we like the sizing. You know, going much bigger than that is not going to be, you know, it's basically going to be blowing people out of the pot. You know, not really showing us any additional profit. What we've got to consider is what can we get to call here. So what has bet flop that now kind of doesn't like the 10 and is going to check back. So the obvious answer would be King X, but there's also going to be hands like Queen Jack 9, Ace Jack 10, Jack 9 8, 9 8 7, all the sort of 3-card straight draws. And you know, we can never get 3 streets of value off that. So we can either bet here and potentially get them to call, but they are then going to be worried about, you know, what on earth am I going to do on the river? Or we can check and allow them to either bluff rivers when they miss, versus what they now perceive to be a cat range, or they can make their hand, complete the straight, and we can potentially extract more value that way. So I don't hate the bet, but I think this could actually show a better profit by checking and allowing some of those draws a chance to improve, and you know, then have the reverse implied odds of hitting those draws. And the times that he has air and doesn't actually have anything, you know, he can then try and make a stop and go bluff against a cat range. Because this is a really, you know, we can't ever extract 3 streets of value here too often. You know, but we were right at the top of the bluff catch range. You know, if you think about the full houses potential, obviously we have the worst one. So it's only really 10x that we can extract 3 streets of value off. And does that check turn? I mean, a tight player might, but that's unlikely, I think. So the bet's fine, but if we bet, we're pretty aware that we're not going to get called on river. You know, if the straight comes in on river and we still bet, they're going to have massive concerns here. So I'm actually okay with a checked line with the intention of bluff catching or kind of value owning people that have made straights on rivers. But you know, again, his line is fine. In this individual instance on the river, I would size down just because our opponent has a cat range, and I think going that big is a tad greedy. But you know, I guess if you don't ask the question, you will never know if they're going to pay you off. But that seemed a little optimistic on the sizing front. I'd have gone more like half pot. It does screen value, but frankly, any sizing you bet in that spot is going to screen value. So, you know, much for muchness on that front, I think. So there is going to be one more hand before we skip the video ahead. But in my notes, I have not mentioned which table that is on, which is not super helpful from my point of view. And something I should probably be doing in the future. Just stay on the right-hand table. We like to fold the sevens. We're going to be raising 50% range button when we're opening, and this isn't going to hit that range. That is going to be, significantly poorer. Quite polarized as well. Difficult to flop with it. So we're totally cool with his fold there. Again, he was overplaying some of this stuff, previously, so it's good to see that he's reined it in a bit. There's definitely, so far in this video, we can definitely see that John is playing better, which is encouraging and definitely the end goal. So it's not that hand. Where is it? Here we go. It's on the right-hand table. And it's going to be the ace, jack, 8, 6. It was just a really quick point to say we like the fold. That we're going to want something a bit more connected, like ace, queen, 9, 8 to kind of continue with. So this is like the very top of what we would be folding here, in a cutoff, but absolutely fine. Suited to the ace would be opening for sure, but we like that he is being disciplined pre-flop. So we're going to skip it forward a little bit. And just as we were praising John for being a bit tight, he goes and opens sixes in a UTG +1 range. Needless to say, this is too wide. This is going to be in a very aggressive cutoff range, or more accurately, in a button range. Again, if we plug in some interactive hand stats just to show how difficult it is to flop well with this hand, and we're going to see that it's basically just not going to flop as well as we would want, really. So it's going to make a lot of underpairs, for the pocket pair of 6. It's going to make like a second, third pair, pocket pair. Rarely makes top pair. The times it does, we have kicker problems. Basically we're trying to hit a set, and even then there's going to be times where we have set over set and reverse implied odds and payoff symmetries associated with that. So it's a hand that also is going to benefit massively from being heads up. We're on some loose tables from what we've seen so far, so they are going to go more multi-way. So we should tailor our range to hands that play better multi-way, and hands containing low pairs are not going to fit that criteria. We would be encouraging us to be folding this. Probably in cutoff as well, to be honest with you, given the loose passive nature of the table, and really only play it in button and use it as a big blind defend against some later position raisers. But as an open, this is far too wide and somewhat overvaluing the hand. As it is, he plays it fine post flop, although it's reasonably straightforward. Just another thing to kind of like trim out of range, we think. And we've got the same problem on the right hand table. The ace queen 6-5, single suited. Again, not going to play particularly well. Again, two hands stitched together. We even have the problem with 3 spades. If we're going to play a three suit hand, it's really got to be a strong 3 suit hand. We're talking ace king jack 10, ace queen jack 9, that kind of wheeled stuff that's really high card, really connected, and so the fact it has 3 spades, or 3 of the suit, it's slightly detrimental, but it's not so detrimental because we're already hitting 2 of the 3 tenants, in that we're hitting the connectivity within the high cards, and we're kind of hitting the suitedness as well. We just happen to have covered one of our own outs. This is not going to be in and under the gun range, and we just need stuff that is more connected, more high card, or if we're going for connected, significantly more connected than this. Just to say, we like punish loose players by playing better ranges, being more aggressive in position, getting hands heads up, widening the value range post flop, start value owning people, and also a point of like note taking and identifying what type of fish we're playing. Are they really passive pre? Are they, absolutely not jobs? And you can have people that are very, very, fishy pre, but actually post flop they're reasonably competent, and vice versa. So we really need to identify what type of fish. To say sort of like, oh, we're playing fishy players isn't enough. We really have to define it. I mean, if we're getting called by 7s here, this really illustrates that we need stuff that is going to play well post. Just from the point of view of the likelihood of our hands going multi-way. That would never be in a calling range, but it indicates how people are playing in this pool, and we should be adjusting accordingly. So yeah, just to touch on that sort of stuff, like the play with the nines, totally cool defend, and pretty easy give up when we do not connect. And on the left-hand table, we have a double suited ace. So I guess this is like a time I should just pause it and touch on like double suitedness. So there's double suited and then there's double suited, which sounds like a little weird, but I'll try and explain. So in this particular instance, how much value does the clubs have given it's 7 high? You know, we can't. It's almost like they're blockers in that we can never extract value from them, really. So I'm going to use a weird analogy, and hopefully it makes sense to people. And you can, adapt this analogy to however works for you, and you can adapt it to connectivity and all sorts of stuff when it comes to PLO pre-flop stuff. So I would sort of talk about the really, really strong double suited stuff like an ace, king, jack 10, where you have an ace high suit, king high suit, and like equivalent that. If we're going to do it, say cars, that would be like a Ferrari, a really good sports car, top of the range. If we took this and let's say that the clubs were queen high, that would be like, an estate, 30 grand worth, pretty reasonable family car, perfectly fine. If we took this would be like the Nissan Micra, the Fiesta. Now the point is, they all have something in common in that they're cars, but if you tried to sell them, to someone for the price of the Ferrari, you'd have a tough time doing it. So just to point out that yes, they all have value, but the value is relative and some are more valuable than others. And you can attract, work with that analogy as to whatever works for you, whether it be clothes, watches, holidays, whatever works for you. But yeah, just to kind of just make the general point that the higher the suit, the more valuable it is, the more value you can extract post-flop. That being said, multi-way, we're going to like to defend with the ace, queen, 7 deuce. It's going to hit a 40% range. I probably would have raised that in a blind versus blind spot, but it's not terrible. And yeah, as I remember, oh yeah, he's going to flop top pair and not much else, and face a significant amount of aggression and just give up. So he's going to open double suited, and that's absolutely fine on the button. He's going to get the tiniest 3-bet in the world, and he's going to be priced into call with just about anything, including a Snickers bar and a tarot card. So absolutely fine for him to call, and he's not really flopped too much apart from backdoor flush draws and a gut shot. We're absolutely fine with the check back. If you're going to bet this type of range based on the fact your opponent's checks, you're going to have to be prepared to fire 2 streets more than likely, and you want something to go with it. Maybe it's a straight draw, maybe it's a flush draw, but backdoors it gets a bit ropey. Basically, you have to really strong read that your opponent's going to give up. And in pools where people are really prone to calling down, that seems optimistic and ambitious. So the turn comes off, and it's actually going to complete a lot of asect range, which is going to represent a lot of our opponent's 3-bet check range on flop. And John is going to call. I can understand the call from the point of view of the fact that he's getting a good price, but when we think about it, we really can only hit the jack. What else can we really use? Are we planning to use the king and the queen as bluff cards, to rep a straight that we have some blockers do, but they're very limited blockers? If we're calling for the pure value of the gut shot, we don't have enough value, and we're kind of relying on our villain shutting down, which seems unlikely. And even then, if they're shutting down, there's a good chance they're putting it into a check call range. So we're still not getting the bluff through. So I think if we were going to play this, we either have to fast play it on the flop, or effectively we're not really repping anything. We're not repping a range that our opponent's going to be particularly scared of, and yeah, so we're absolutely fine with him folding turn here. I think it's a slight overplay. It's not a massively expensive one, but something to be touched on, and unfortunately we have to fold river. The queens, we like to fold. Something like queen, queen, 10, 9 would be a marginal open given rainbow, assuming we hadn't been open in front of. So the right-hand table is, the left-hand table is all kicking off. We get an open, a 3-bet, and a 4-bet. Yeah, so John has kings and 7s, single suited. Now, we're just going to say straight away that in the Betfair series, he would have plowed the money in and not even thought about it. So it's very good that he's, we can tell, one, from, him kind of circling this as, hey, please look at this, and from the fact of how much time he spends on this, that he's starting to realize that this kind of stuff really does mean strength. First of all, even if we assume that the four bet is screwing around, which is incredibly unlikely, we still have to worry about the open and the three bet. We've seen an open from the tightest position in the tightest range. We've just got three bet from the second tightest range that's three betting the tightest range. And then, of course, the four bets managed to go over the top of the two tightest ranges. So, of the four bet scenarios you could have, this is just about the most terrifying of the lot. So, I'm going to run the tape. John is going to think about jamming. He resists. Fantastic that he does resist because he would be setting money on fire long term. And yeah, the lack of the ace block is kind of crucial as well. But to be honest, in a four bet spot, the ace blockers really don't have so much value just because you're probably going to see aces anyway. I mean, it's such an ace dominant range. If you let's say we gave someone a 5% range in a four bet spot, and if you go into Odds Oracle, you can drop into Tools and go into Range Explorer, and it will show you every single combo within that range. You would see so many aces in that range. It would be so ace dominant. And to be honest, a four bet range is probably even higher than 5%. So yeah, we like the fold. It's a spot he would have definitely stacked off previously. He saved himself, a buy-in. He's only put in one, half a big blind. It's absolutely fine to just give that up. As it is, kind of weird, the hand that decided to 4-bet, we've been making a note of that. There are some random spazzes in micros. That being said, it doesn't mean that all those 4-bets are random spazzes. They are going to still contain a lot of aces. And as we see, the 3-better had aces anyway. So yeah, we're a big fan of John getting away from that spot. As you said, it's something that he was stacking off in previously, and saving buy-ins, doing that is going to greatly aid his progress in this bankroll challenge. So give himself a pat on the back that's a noticeable spot that he's learned from in the 10 days, I think, between these videos. Could be wrong on that. Maybe it's a week. However short a period it is, he's shown progression, and we're happy to see that. The right-hand table, we get the jacks. This is a reasonably good open under the gun. It's still at the bottom of the range. If we're going to think about jacks and tens we'd open, this would be in it. Hands like jack, jack, 10, 9 would be, for example. Maybe jack 10 10 9 would be. There really wouldn't be many tens. Something like 10 7, 10 10 7 6 wouldn't be. We're really looking for connected with suits, and that kind of fits the bill. So yeah, we're okay with that. So we have another hand coming up. I will attempt to skip to it if I can find it. There we go. It's on the left-hand table, and it is the double-suited king. So we're going to get an open on the button, and John's going to defend. We like to defend. It's too weak to 3-bet, but it's got pretty good post-flop potential, and against a 50% range, it's going to be a damn good defend. And also, just calling, helps us pot control, etc. Get a good flop. We could have considered leading this, to be honest. That being said, if we lead and get raised, it puts us in somewhat of an awkward spot. For the record, if you happen to have a set here, a set and a flush draw, you are ahead of all straights equity-wise, so you should be quite happy to pile it in. If you have a set and a flush draw that's live versus a naked straight, it's roughly 62-38. If they have a flush draw and have a couple of blockers, it's a little closer, but you're still ahead. So just to say, if you ever find yourself in this spot where you have a very strong flush draw on a set, just pile the money in, you're ahead anyway, equity-wise. So goes check, check, and John decides to bet his 3-pair and flush draw. So we like the bet. Opponent's check, cap range, totally cool with leading. And John gets a weird min raise. So he's in an awkward spot here, being out of position. If he raises, he's almost certainly going to be behind the range that is willing to call or indeed jam on him. The min raise kind of screams strength as well. Of what it screams strength of is a bit of a moot point. I guess 3-7s is very unlikely but possible. It's more credibly 9-8 here. Given all the redraws and the equity he has, we're totally cool with him just deciding to call and evaluate river, and that's a pretty disappointing river. So the opponent could check back here if they want to. They decide not to and go for the bet. And I really don't see, it would have to, for him to call there, his opponent would have to be very, very balanced, and he would have to think of, what bluffs his opponent can have. And it's very difficult to be bluffing on that in that spot, really. So there's so many straights. Okay, there aren't so many sets given the way the hand's played. But it's so unlikely that our opponent can be bluffing there. You know, although we're at top of bluff catch range, there really aren't many bluffs to catch. Is the point I'm making. And the lack of straight blockers we have also really hurts the hand. You know, if we had even a queen, or you know, I guess given the fact it's checked, the ace queen's less likely. Something like a 9 or an 8, it might lean it more towards call, but one blocker still is, you know, not worth it so much against such a nutted range. So yeah, we like the fold there. It's a very annoying fold to make, don't get me wrong, but it is going to be the correct fold from his point of view more times than it's not, and we're just going to play the percentages as to you know, think of the long game and how likely it is that we are going to be ahead / behind there, and we're going to be behind far more times than we're ahead. So yeah, we're happy with how we played that. You know, sometimes you know, in any form of poker, it's just about minimizing your losses as much as it is maximizing your profits, and he's done well to minimize his losses there. So we have an interesting hand. So straight off the bat, we're going to say that we like the fold here. He's thought about raising, and he certainly would have been raising in the Betfair series. So if we're going to be raising, we want really, you know, we want the stronger versions of this hand, like Jack 10, 9, 7, double suit, for example. We want the gaps at the bottom rather than the top. You know, there's a very noticeable gap here. So again, just to sort of illustrate it, we are going to draw up how this would play against the 12% range of what we would be playing. And, you know, the flop equity distribution is all right, but the point is the sort of hot and cold is not so good. If we compared that to the hypothetical Jack 10, 9, 7 that I was just talking about, we see it's a good 3% jump in that, in the hot and cold. But the point is, it's going to have so much better flop equity distribution, and I believe I also posed the question of how likely are we to make the nut high in this spot, and it's about 8.25% with that, which is, you know, actually not a bad percentage. If you ran it on you know, quite, you know, in any range, you would actually see you wouldn't make the nuts that frequently. You compare it to about, you know, 3.6 here, so about a 5% difference in how likely we are to make the nuts. Doesn't sound like much, but on such small margins our win rate's built. So you know, key point there of how likely we can make the nuts versus how likely we're going to make weaker hands, and you know, reverse implied odds. And a hand like Jack 10, 9, 7 is just going to make better flushes and make higher straights, and we don't have so many straight over straight situations, we don't have so many 2 pair over 2 pair situations, and we don't have so many flush over flush situations. So that's why that would be in the open range, and the hand that he folded would not be. So yeah, so we get aces in the button on the left-hand table, and that's just about the best spot you can find aces. And I believe it's going to get folded around, and John's going to open. And the big blind is going to call, and John flops just about as good as he possibly can. So the only sort of negative that we can say about this is that we actually have one of the queens, which reduces the probability of our opponent actually hitting too much. And I guess, you know, if a straight comes off, it blocks one of our full house outs. John sizes down. I mean, I understand what he did because it's, you know, such a dry board, etc. I maybe go half pot because I'm greedy, but it's a very, very minor point. And our opponent is going to call. Turn comes a 3, and we have made the nut boat. John again, I think he's sizing down a little too small here. Again, I'd go sort of more like 1 here, just to kind of extract value and punish random 3s, punish random queens, make raises more expensive the time our opponent wants to bluff raise, or, you know, raise a hand that had equity on flop, like King Jack 10, for example. And, you know, it's still a reasonably weak bet and still can induce. But just, you know, increase the size of the pot to make a river bet, you know, that much bigger, effectively. Just quick touch on the right-hand table, we would be raising this on button, which I think John, you know, but it's perfectly good fold against the open. So on the left-hand table, John actually gets raised. And at this point, I imagine he's probably thinking of Vegas and the Mirage. So at this point, we love the fact that John just calls. So if he raises, it looks crazy strong. You know, what hand ever re-raises here? I mean, maybe queens full as well as aces full, but the point is it's going to be a crazy polarized range, and that range is going to be boats, and the bigger boats at that. So, yeah, we love calling. It allows hands that are bluffing to continue to bluff. It allows weaker boats to continue to value earn themselves, and doesn't tip him off to the strength of our hand. It kind of almost artificially caps our range, which is fantastic from our point of view in extracting value. And at this point, John is going to get led into on the river, and he is going to be raising. He's just thinking about what size. So you can see he toys around with it a bit. And I think he eventually goes for 12 is the sizing he is. Yeah. So minor point here. I would just go for the lot, frankly. I think that we're not very likely to get called, but the times we do get called, they're going to call. Like the difference between them calling 12 and calling an extra $3.50 is negligible, frankly. So you might as well be greedy and just charge the whole lot. You know, if you're bluffing, you would probably bluff the whole lot. So in a way, this even looks even stronger than just jamming. Not that I think you're particularly likely to get called, but you know, the times that ace-3 wants to call down, the times that queen-3 wants to call down, you know, heaven forbid someone actually has queen to full, you know, and that happens to be the case queen on board, then, you know, just go for the absolute maximum because they're never going to re-raise you for the extra 350. So just be greedy. As it is, it's fold anyway, but, you know, pretty nice pot. Like the way he's played it. He's extracted as much value as he possibly can. I mean, maybe sizing up on flop and turn makes this bet a little bigger, but you know, again, we're nitpicking. But yeah, totally love the way he's played this hand. And unfortunately, he does get a fold here, but you know, he got as much as he could, I think. I did forget how long that player tanked for, though, burning my camera time. And next hand, John gets double suited aces. When it's going good, it's going good. And our opponent is actually going to 3-bet from the small blind. So this could very likely be tilt, frankly. John's going to 4-bet, which is as standard as it gets. He's ahead of just about it. Well, he's ahead of everything, basically, and chopping with other aces, more than likely. He is double suited. And much like we touched in the first 4-part series, if you are going to call off, jamming is probably best just to try and exploit the tiny amount of fold equity you have. Although SPR is about 0.5 on flop, I believe. So you know, good luck getting a fold there. He's going to roll over a 7 and a gut shot. John dodges and holds, and we would be making a note that he's gone and done that. Definitely on the loose side of things. So just going to skip forward and analyze the last half hour, sorry, the last 5 minutes of this before we wrap it up and analyze the second half hour of this video in the second part. And to be honest, for all I've been complimenting John about the improvements, the last 5 minutes are back to bad habits, and we are going to pick him up on those. So the first hand we are going to be touching on, I think, is going to pop up momentarily. I can't remember exactly which table it is on, but I think it's the right-hand table. Yeah, it is. So here's kings here, and he has them in the big blind. So they're not super connected. They are single-suited. They're doing okay. And John's going to get raised on button, and he's going to call. We're absolutely fine with the call here. This is actually going to be a bit of a problem to play post flop, just because it's not going to flop particularly well. So something like king 10-9. Single suited, we'd be considering 3-betting just because it's going to play better, it's more connected, it's got more potential post flop. But you know, this kind of like weak middling strength king, we're totally cool with the way he's played it. He is going to go check call on flop, which we're an absolute fan of, and we are going to go check to a river. And that is where the interesting stuff happens. So the river comes at 6, and John snap bets it. So I mean, first things first, he's definitely, you know, got a strong hand. He has a full house. But we've got to think about, what are we looking to achieve by betting here? You know, what does our opponent have when they check turn? What are we trying to exploit? And our opponent's cap range by checking turn for sure. So our opponent's range is likely going to be some occasionally aces, occasionally queens, and the rest of the time kind of air, busted flush draws type hands. So if we're betting, we might get called by queens, we will get called by aces, but we don't want to be, and we're folding out all the rest. You know, and all the rest of the stuff is the stuff we want to get called by, really. I'm excluding sixes and jacks full here because I fully anticipate they'd go turn, bet turn, but just go kind of on the smaller side of things. But if we even included those, then that makes the bet even ropier. So I think this hand is a perfect hand to bluff catch. It's right at the top of our bluff catch range, and it allows our opponent to again try a stop go bluff. When we check, we're basically saying we don't have a pair, and the times we do, it's very weak, and you can barrel us off it. And our opponent is far more likely to have high pairs than we are, so he can, rep the aces, rep the kings, rep the queens, and just plow river and expect to get it through. In this instance, we actually have a hand we can call down with, which is why we would be checking to induce. So I think that's going to be a better line long term. Just a sort of minor thing. As it is, John decides to bet, gets called by aces, which is pretty standard. So from a results point of view, it wouldn't make much of a difference because we'd be going bet call anyway. But against range, I think I prefer the check call line versus the bet line, just to allow all the air, and a lot of his range there is going to be air, just to sort of fire off, and we can bluff catch pretty happily there. So yeah, just a sort of a small point there. So he's going to fold the ace queen a7. We're a fan of that fold. Again, two hands stuck together. Been talking about that quite a bit over the course of the videos. So we're a fan of him folding that kind of stuff. Definitely going to be on the plus point of that. But we do have 4 key hands in this last 2.5 minutes of raw footage or so. And the first one is going to be this. It's on the left-hand table, and John is going to open, well, what I can politely say is a terrible hand. So we saw a lot of this in the first, the first series on Betfair, where he's overvaluing low connectivity. If we think about the 3 tenets of what we want pre-flop, the connectivity, the suitedness, and the high cards. Well, we don't have high cards. The highest card we have is 6. We don't really have the connectivity. I mean, it's low connectivity, so even the times we hit straights, it's going to be straight over straight. Suitedness, I mean, do you really want to start value betting a 5 high flush? So there really isn't much going for this hand. Again, we're going to run the interactive hand stats to prove the point as to why this is just frankly a shockingly poor hand. And of all the things I've seen John do in this first half hour, this is easily the most concerning, and easily, if he takes nothing else away, please stop playing this stuff. This would probably not even be in a button range. If it is, it's right at the bottom of it, but I wouldn't even put it in the button range at this point. Double suited we would, single suited we would not. Just to say, we're going to flop particularly poorly, a lot of third pairs. Times we have a third pair, we're going to have second pair. Times we have 2 pair, it's going to be bottom 2 pair. Straight draws we have are going to be the low end of straight draws. The flushes draws we're going to have are going to be weak flushes that can get value owned and have horrendous reverse implied odds. All in all, this is just going to be a particularly poor hand. Factor in, we've also opened it from early position in a spot where it's significantly more likely we take it multi-way. So without hugely plagiarizing Jay Nando's, who's covered this in his Pot Limit Omaha University course, he ran through the maths as to exactly how likely you are to have, what result you have pre-flop, as to whether you're going to, from each position, whether you're likely to get a fold, whether you're going to get called and take it heads up, whether you're going to get called and take it multi-way, and whether you're going to get 3-bet. And it's quite shocking as to how little fold equity you have on just about every position but the button. And how likely you are to take it multi-way from under the gun or under the +1. So, if you have that course, go and look at it, and you can analyze all that maths and realize, the exactitudes of that. But basically, all it is to prove is that multi-way, this hand is very likely to go multi-way, and the vague strength this hand has, which is very limited in the first place, is going to be as a heads-up hand. So taking it multi-way further accentuates the problem that we have with this hand, where we're playing a really weak range and we're actually playing in a position we shouldn't be playing it, because it benefits from being heads up in a spot that it's very unlikely to be heads up in. To prove the point, we get call from the cutoff, and that is obviously going to give everyone else a better price to then get involved. And just creates a kind of nightmare scenario for us. So I can't actually remember if this goes 3-handed or 4-handed. Oh god. Okay, so we get a 3-bet. First of all, we're going to assume that when our opponent 3-bets from the big blind into 3 people, he's going to be right at the top of his range. He is going to be he's basically, it's going to be aces and not much else. He's very likely going multi-way. And think about it. He's basically three betting the weakest position into multiple opponents. So he's really signaling strength. I would actually be folding this. We don't have the flush value, we don't have the straight value. This hand is very likely to go multi-way again, where yet more money is going in. This hand does not have front-end nuttiness, which we've touched on previously, which it's going to need given what the stack to pot ratio will be. A hand with rear-end nuttiness here, namely hands that make straights and flushes, are going to have to be of the nutted variety. If we get a spade flush draw here, are we really going to want to put money in with a 5-5 flush draw? So basically the draws are worthless. So yeah, we would just be folding this and doing so fairly happily. As it is, John calls, and thank God he's managed to get an awful flop. Right on table, John is going to 3-bet the Queen Jack 6-8, and again, this is going to be a bit too wide. It's an interesting hand, and we're going to finish up with this one before we touch on this hand here. Just because there is quite a lot going on there, and we are going to go through it in detail. So we flop a 4 and not much else on this spot, so I fully anticipate that John's going to be folding here. A couple of streets too late, but he does. So yeah, we're going to run it back with the double suited Queen Jack 6-8, and just to say, we're going to 3-bet here, and it's too wide. It's if we do the interactive hand stats on this, we're going to see that it flops, reasonably well, but not stunningly well. And hands I would include in the 3-bet range would be hands such as the Queen Jack 10-9, the Queen Jack 10-8, the Queen Jack 9-7, basically more connected variants that are just going to flop better. And actually, we're going to pose the question of actually we're not. We're going to. So we're just going to pose the question of how often are we going to, what are we likely to flop? And we see here is a lot of second pairs, some top pairs, etc. But it's okay, but not spectacular. If we then compared it to a higher connected variant of that, again, we're going to make more 2 pairs. We're going to make more top pairs. We're going to make more straights, and we're just going to have far more post-flop potential. If we ran if we put a range in and ran it, in the flop edge distribution, we'd be doing significantly better with the more connected variant. So this is just a little too gappy for us to put in a 3-bet range. As it is, when we actually get 4-bet, we are actually going to have to call this, and we're going to run the maths as to why that is the case. So again, we're going to put the flop equity distribution in, and we're going to put the hot and cold in as well. So when our opponent called 4-bets here, the range I'm going to give him is going to be, let's say, 4%. That seems like a pretty reasonable number. It could even be tighter than that. 4% contains, there's 2.5% of aces. So we're also going to put in some big kings with a suited ace, the connected variety, like ace, king, king 10 with a nut flush draw, that sort of stuff. It's questionable as to whether that would even be in it, but for the purpose of that, we're gonna put it in. So you see the flop equity distribution is not terrible. We have about 60%. We'd want more, and indeed the Queen Jack 10-8 that we touched on earlier would have more. And hot and cold, I've got more than 33% required. It's not stunning. The point I would make is, I touched on earlier in the video. If we put something like Ace King Jack Deuce in, you would see that it's hot and cold in this spot would be absolutely shockingly bad. The point I'm trying to make about this double suited hand is that its equity doesn't suffer an enormous drop off by being 4-betting and versus tighter ranges. You could go into Flopzilla, which is a free program, and you could put in those 2 hands, put them in versus random ranges, put them in versus 20%, 10%, 5%, and further down, and you would see that the Ace King Jack Deuce has far more equity to begin with, has more equity against a 20% range. But you'd see the equity to drop off with this kind of hand wouldn't be that noticeable. We'd be dropping from something like 44% down to 39%, whereas with the Ace King Jack Deuce, we'd be dropping from 55, 56%, and against this, we'd be dropping down to almost certainly under 30%, where we wouldn't even be getting the correct price to call hot and cold wise. And that's just because there's going to be so much aces and kings in this range that any hand that contains an ace or king, or indeed a pair, is going to be polarized or effectively playing a 3-card hand in this spot. So the one benefit we do have in this instance is the fact that our cards are live and we have the kind of hand where we should be calling a 4-bet. And as we run it, John is going to call a 4-bet. And he gets what is a pretty damn good flop. Unfortunately for him, he is going to be coolered massively. And he poses a question in a second in the chat as to whether this was a good shove from Villain. And the short answer is yes, but we're going to illustrate why that happens to be the case. So I'm going to put all aces in as to what our opponent's range is in this spot, just to kind of illustrate the point, but we could potentially put in a slightly wider range if we wanted to. But for the purpose of this, it is going to be, it's basically going to illustrate what we want from the calculations. So what do we want? 5-card hand type is a flush on the flop. So yeah, we're going to pose the question as Oracle. How often player 4, which is just where I've inputted the aces range, has a flush on flop? And if we combine all the aces, we see that we've got 24%, which is approximately what we'd expect it to be. But just to illustrate from the math point of view why that is. Now, our opponent, if he has aces in this range, is going to have an SPR of, given John's stack, of under 1. So we have to assume that our opponent's going to be jamming all aces. So if our opponent is going to be jamming all his 1 pairs, he kind of has to jam his flushes. And the reason is that if our opponent's jamming all his 1 pairs, our calling range has to adjust. So we would expect that we would have to call 2 pairs, we'd have to call all flushes, and we would have to call some pairs and straight draws, and potentially even some pairs, like a 10 that had 3 live cards. For example, if we had Queen Jack 10 7, it would be extremely unlikely we'd ever fold here. And as such, the flush would have to extract value. Now, the reason the aces would jam if they were bare aces is that the board really isn't going to get any better for them. If they continue, they have a hand with front-end nuttiness, albeit in just the 1-pair form. But the more cards that come off, the more likely they are for their opponents to hit 2 pairs, hit straights, hit flushes, etc. So they have to get it in on flop and just pray they don't get called within 3 seconds and they're dead. So that kind of that basically means that by jamming that very 1-pair centric range, he's very likely to get called lighter than he would do in a single raise pot, just because of the impact of SPR on the spot, on the stacked pot. So as such, he has to balance the range by jamming all his strong hands. If he suddenly checks flop and then decides to bet turn, it wouldn't make any sense for bare aces to do that. Allow a card to come off. Why would they ever want to do that? And potentially put themselves in a horrendous spot. Valuing themselves. So if he's going to be doing that with all his bare aces, which I strongly suspect he will be, he has to do that with the stronger variants, whether that be his 2 pairs, whether that be his sets, and indeed his flushes. As it is, it's a very elementary call from John. It's an unfortunate result, of course. But that would be the reason as to why his jam with the flush is absolutely reasonable. Now, it's possible that he just jammed because he got excited and wasn't actually following that logic. But if he is following that logic, then that would be, that would be the reason why he's doing it. So we have 2 hands here, and these are the last 2 hands of the video. The first one's left-hand table, and it is the double-suited queen. So we touched in the start of the video as to not overcalling 3 bets, not closing action. We've already touched on the fact that if we call 3 bets, we're not expecting to show a profit there. We're just confident that we lose less money than we would do by folding. If we fold, we're basically saying that if we'd, raised a pot, that we've put in 3.5 big blinds, 350 BB per 100. And by calling, we're basically saying we're not going to lose 350 BB per 100 by calling. That but we'd expect our win rate to be something like -1 big blind per 100 or 100 BBs. So we're basically saying that we're not going to lose as much by calling. When we're overcalling, we don't have such a good price. We've only put 1 big blind in here. So we're basically saying that by calling, we think that we're going to show a better win rate than losing one big blind in this spot. And by overcalling, we're not, frankly. We cap our range, we're not closing action, and we're out of position. So there's a real possibility this could get 4-bets and we have to fold or should fold. And being out of position in this spot sucks. Having a hand with no nutted potential sucks. So just a spot to fold, and that is what we should have done here on the left-hand table. And unfortunately, he's going to overcall, and somewhat of a mistake. On the right-hand table, he's going to call queens. We're absolutely fine with this call. We think it's perfectly reasonable. And just to illustrate the problem with not having a nut hand, John actually flops a gut shot and a second nut flush draw and ends up folding, just for fear that his opponent has aces or indeed has a higher flush draw. And that kind of illustrates why he shouldn't have called pre. Anyway, on the right-hand table, we get an interesting flop. We have an overpair and flush draw. The problem we have is, are we playing for the value of the flush draw, or are we playing for the value of the pair? And we're not really sure, to be honest. If we're in a spot where we have top set and a nut flush draw, we can very confidently say I'm playing for the value of the set and the flush draw just happens to be backup. If we flop a nut flush draw, we can say we're very confidently playing for the value of the flush draw. There are going to be some instances where we have like a 13-card straight draw with it and actually have an equity advantage over any set, and we get to fast play it, but we're still very sure as to what cards are going to help us, in either eventuality. And those are extreme examples, but they prove the point. In this instance, we're not sure. Do we want a dry run out, in which case we're calling down for the value of the queens, or do we want to hit the flush? In either instance, they're not nutted out, so we can't get 3 streaks of value from them. So we're basically playing a cap range, and we have reverse implied odds, so we can't bet for value, so we don't have the implied value of hitting the draws, or indeed taking the pair to showdown. So we're in a very awkward spot. So Betley is going to lead into 2 people, which is, to be frank, quite strong, and John is going to call. We would have been okay with a fold, like heads up, this would be fine as a call. With a player to act behind, it's an okay fold. But he makes the call. It's not the worst call in the world, provided that we are going to be disciplined on turns and fold when we don't improve. If opponent 2 barrels here, it's just going to be, a hand that beats us, frankly. He's not going to 2-barrel a bare flush draw. It's extraordinarily unlikely. Our opponent bets again, and John unfortunately decides to call again. Again, if I pose the question, what are you hoping the river is? Do you want the spade? Do you want the? Do you want a brick? There are even instances where that could potentially hurt us. Let's say a 7 comes off and our opponent still bets. Now, we can very confidently say our opponent has aces or kings, or indeed possibly has a 7. There aren't many in his range, but if we include stuff like Jack 10, 9, 7 double suited for range, board coverage purposes, it's reasonable to assume our opponent has it. There are also going to be some 3 Broadway double suited hands that have a 7, like Ace, King, Queen, 7 double suited. And there's going to be some pairs that just happen to have a second pair, although that would make quads, but that would be unlikely. But something like aces can very plausibly be like Ace, Ace, 7, 5, or something along those lines. They just have 2 random cards with the pair. And we've seen people play pretty loose, so it's reasonable to assume they're going to have some more of this stuff than we would in our range, just because they're playing wider. So the question is, what on earth are we hoping our villain has here? Are we hoping he has the nut flush draw and has nothing, in which case we're obligated to call every time it bricks if we assume he's going to overbluff? Are we hoping to hit the flush, but if we hit the flush and our opponent still bets, what do we do then? So it's just a really, really awkward spot from that point of view. As it is, we get a brick river, and our opponent very kindly checks. I guess 6-5 was there anyway, so it's a bit puzzling as to why he checked, but I think it's honestly because he doesn't know where he is either. I have to say, when I watched the first part of the video, this particular hand, the first time around, when I went check, my instant reaction was you've lost to aces. I was a little surprised it was kings. But that kind of proves the point as to where I thought he was in the hand. But not having an idea of whether you're playing, of what you want, whether you're playing for the value of the draw or playing for the value of the pair, is basically means you're never going to play the hand optimally because you don't honestly know what you want from the hand. So yeah, just something I think John should think about there. That maybe the flop call's fine, but then on turn, if you don't improve, you have to kind of reevaluate and throw the hand away. So that's going to cover the first part of this video. I'm going to cover the second part of the half-hour raw footage in the second part of the video. Hopefully you can join me for that. But with that, all that covered, I've been Tom for PokerVIP, and I hope you join me for part 2 of me reviewing John's bankroll.